Welcome to the broadcast tonight. I'm Ken Duberstein, sitting in for Charlie Rose, who will undergo a mitral valve repair surgery in Paris on Wednesday morning. Charlie expects to be back in New York in 10 days. Given his deep appreciation for his audience, he wanted to share this information and assure you that the show will be in good hands. In the meantime, we'll try not to let him down. We wish Charlie a speedy recovery and look forward to his rapid return. Tonight we begin with a conversation about the big story in Washington today, the resignation of the White House Chief of Staff, Andrew Card.
We're hearing shake-up a lot today. It's less of a shake-up than it is a shuffle. It is not a dramatic change. It was not intended to be a dramatic change. I think it does signal a willingness to the Hill and others, especially other Republicans, that the president is willing to make some changes, but that he sees no need to do a dramatic alteration of his staff or his policies.
This was a way for the president to get some excitement, to have people give him a second chance to take a second look, whether it's people inside, whether it's people outside, and yet not have it look like he responded to pushes from the press or the Hill. Anyone who knows the president at all knows that Bush aides are not going to respond like alpacas or llamas to a push from the pundits or people on the Hill. So this is a way for him to say that he resisted that, but is, as Roger pointed out, willing to listen.
I think that there's this element that you hear around Washington among some Republicans that perhaps the people around the president in the inner circle are too much sort of what one political science describes as mind guards, people who are with the president, sort of his companions, rather than doing other things. That may be unfair, but that's the kind of criticism that was bubbling up that Josh Bolten will have to address.
Next, Dennis Ross talks to Middle East experts about the elections in Israel.
A lot of the critiques of people who've made territorial concessions is there's no mandate, you've never had a referendum, you've not been elected on these ideas. Olmert decided he was going to go forward based on these policies. He took a hit in terms of the total votes, but I think the 31 seats he does have are now more consequential because people know exactly what they're getting.
End of conflict is possible. In fact, Abu Mazen took a very brave position and said, within 1 year we can bring about peace. Well, if he has the intentions, let us test the situation some more, and let us also put Hamas to the test itself in delivering what might be a possibility for compromise.
And we conclude with Anna Marie Cox, former blogger known as Wonket. Her new book is Dog Days, a Novel.
It's a story of a young campaign aide named Melanie Thornton, whose life is going grand, her candidate is doing well, and she's having an affair with the most powerful political journalist in Washington.
Yeah.
And then things start to go wrong. She comes back from the convention to find that a mysterious 527 group is accusing her candidate of nefarious doings. They claim that he was brainwashed while at Harvard so that at some point in the future, on a given command, he will redistribute wealth. They're called Citizens for Clear Heads. And then also it turns out that people are starting to find out about her affair, which is not so great either. And so she and her best friend come up with a wag the dog scheme with a lot of tail.
Politics, Israeli elections, and a former blogger. Next on Charlie Rose.
Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
For every drop of yourself you give, get every drop back. We offer over 80 ways to hydrate, energize, nourish, relax, or enjoy every drop of life.
Charlie Rose on PBS is brought to you in part by J.P. Morgan Chase, providing financial services and solutions to more than 30 million consumers, institutions, corporations, and governments worldwide.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide. From our studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Andy Card, the second longest serving chief of staff in White House history, has resigned. He's going to be replaced by Budget Director Josh Bolten. President Bush announced the news in a press conference earlier today. Here's a part of what he said and what Andy Card said.
Earlier this month, Andy Card came to me and raised the possibility of stepping down as Chief of Staff. After 5.5 years, he thought it might be time to return to private life. And this past weekend, I accepted Andy's resignation. Andy Card has served me and our country in historic times. On a terrible day when America was attacked, during economic recession and recovery, through storms of unprecedented destructive power, in peace and in war.
Working in the White House is a tremendous privilege, and it's almost beyond description the great privilege it is to work at the White House. But it is even a greater honor to serve as the President's Chief of Staff, especially to you, Mr. President. I have watched as you have kept your oath to preserve, protect, and defend that Constitution, and I know that there are a lot of people who help you do that. It starts with the White House staff. It goes to everybody who serves in the executive branch of government, and most especially those young men and women who wear uniforms and help defend us.
Joining me here in Washington is Mike Allen, White House correspondent for Time Magazine, and also with me is Roger Simon, chief political correspondent for Bloomberg News. Welcome, guys. Welcome,
Thanks, Ken.
fellas.
Thank you.
What does this mean, Mike? Is this the beginning of change in the Bush White House?
If it's change, it's incremental change. The way people described it to us was this had the advantage of some new energy, some new excitement, but without the risk and hassles of true change. As you know, there's no one closer to the president than Josh Bolten, who was had the bonding experience in Austin during the 2000 campaign, where he ran the policy shop, and then he helped set up this White House system during the first term when he was the deputy chief of staff for policy. So this is someone who's steeped in this system, appreciates this system. Now they do say that there may be some changes. They do tell us that before he takes office on takes over on April 14th. That he will look at the White House from top to bottom. He may make some changes, but I think they would be surprised if there were any wholesale changes. You're not going to see the whole cabinet be asked for its resignation or some new organizational chart or anything like that. But you are going to see a different style, and Mr. Bolten signaled that today already. He started calling the Capitol Hill and asking for their input. So he's trying to start off on the right foot there.
Yeah.
Roger?
I agree with everything Mike said, but just the caveat that it's less of a shakeup. You're hearing shakeup a lot today. It's less of a shakeup than it is a shuffle. It is not a dramatic change. It was not intended to be a dramatic change. I think it does signal a willingness to the Hill and others, especially other Republicans, that the president is willing to make some changes, but that he sees no need to do a dramatic alteration of his staff or his policies.
Do you think this enhances Karl Rove's clout inside the White House?
Well, Ken does, in the sense that he's the last man standing as far as a staffer. The vice, and I'm told that one part of Secretary Card's decision it was described to me as a decision that he came to selflessly. He doesn't want to go. They told me that, and Ken, you could tell us about this, but they say no one wants to leave that job, particularly this White House. No one wants to leave this family. But the vice president can't go. Mr. Rove still has the legal issue that's not officially resolved, although I think it's practically resolved. And so Secretary Card felt like he was the one that needed to make this change. Things just could not continue the way they were. And he came to this conclusion March 8th. He started talking to the president about it a week ago Sunday. The president had his first conversation with Josh Bolten, signaled and asked him if he was willing to do this, and he said that he was.
Do you buy to any extent that he's just tired, that Andy Card is just tired out and would like a rest?
No, not at all. I think the way it was explained to me was that, as you guys know, Secretary Card was a wily Massachusetts politician. He understands how things work. He understands that the president would benefit from either the perception of change or change. And he saw that the easiest way, the clearest way to make that happen would be for him to sort of offer himself up. And you saw the video in the Oval Oval Office this morning. I saw him in person in the Rose Garden. It was a very emotional time, and I expect I'll be shocked if the New York Times quotation of the day tomorrow is not what Secretary Card in the Oval Office, which is when he quotes Ecclesiastes, saying there's different seasons, and he's saying it's a different season, and that's acknowledgement that his time in this job has passed.
Yeah, but you know, as a former chief of staff, Andy's been there 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for 5.5 years. Only Sherman Adams has served longer. It is a total burnout job. He had to want some relief to spend time with Kathy, and it was a convenient time to go. Andy has done superbly because he's done what George Bush wanted him to do. He was not John Sununu for Bush 41. He was the collegial, get the troops together and march in the same direction, rather than with the hammer. He was much more the coaxer.
Yeah.
I wonder, Ken, since you've been in the job, if you think we in the press make too much of staff and staff changes. I mean, after all, neither Andy Card or Josh Bolten are the president. And how much difference does a new chief of staff really make?
Number one, there's only one person who's indispensable in any White House. As Mike, you said, it's the President of the United States. You follow, all your power is derivative as chief of staff. You do what the president wants you to do. It's not Andy Card's policy or Josh Bolten's policy. It is the president's. But you have the nuance of leadership, of style, of how you include, how you make phone calls to the Hill rather than waiting for the phone calls to come from the Hill. It's things like that. And so if you, in fact, go to the Oval Office, as Andy did, or as I suspect Josh, who I've also known for a long time, will do, and tell the president this is reality. This is what you have to cope with, and have all the staff options. I think Josh is going to do massively of that, and Andy did it exactly the way the president wanted it done. The other thing that I got from the Andy's comments today, some White House chiefs of staff always thought of themselves as the president's best friend. You can't be a best friend and a chief of staff. What Andy said is, I've been your chief of staff, hopefully now I can be your friend. And I thought that was a very poignant moment in that speech.
I thought one of the most interesting qualities of Josh Bolten, when I first interviewed him in 1999 when George Bush was beginning his run for the presidency, that he wasn't a Kool-Aid drinker. He wasn't one of these staffers who was so taken with the candidate, or the governor in this case, that he can't give him objective advice. I mean, Josh Bolten was 100% loyal to George Bush, but he still said, oh, here are our problems, here are the areas we have to improve, this is what we have to do to win. And it built a lot of credibility, I think, between him and the press.
It's something that Josh and Secretary Card share is a passion for Nationals baseball. They have season tickets behind each other, behind the home dugout. You mentioned Mr. Card's, Secretary Card's wife, or the Reverend Kathleen Card. Right. I always appreciated the fact she would always tell us that she prays for the press. And of course, that's a very ambiguous comment. You can take it a lot of different ways, but I'd always tell her that we appreciate it. We need it. We need it. Which is true.
What's she praying for with the press?
She didn't spell that out. But one thing I will point out about this, that it allows, this is a very emotional day at the White House. There's very few staffers that people would say that they love, and there is amazing affection for Secretary Card in that building. But this was a way for the president to get some excitement, to have people give him a second chance to take a second look, whether it's people inside, whether it's people outside, and yet not have it look like he responded to pushes from the press or the Hill. Anyone who knows the president at all knows that Bush aides are not going to respond like alpacas or llamas to a push from the pundits or people on the Hill. So this is a way for him to say that he resisted that, but is, as Roger pointed out, willing to listen.
He did it his own way.
Right.
Well put.
His comfort zone.
But still, it is largely an insider's move. I mean, it's not totally, because he obviously has to work with Congress, but most people never heard of Andy Card. Most people never heard of Josh Bolten. Most people are not going to notice a change. And I don't think people should expect to read the polls a week from today and expect President Bush to be in the mid-40s. It's probably not going to happen that way. This is sort of a dramatic and emotional day at the White House, and it's important to those of us in the business, and it's important to the functioning of the White House. But still, this is not the kind of thing that's going to sweep through America, and you're going to note some kind of instant change. And it is a recognition by the president that he is in some trouble. This is, after all, I mean, asking Card to leave, or Card even offering his resignation, was a sign that something had to be done. You have to arrest this sort of constant nibbling fall off in the polls, and you have to do something with Congress.
Do you think that's going to be the result?
I don't think it's going to be the result quickly. I think that the most visible result, if there is one, is better relations with the Republicans in Congress. I wouldn't, hopefully with Democrats too, but at least initially with the Republicans in Congress.
But I also understand that Josh has very good relations, especially with the Budget Committee Democrats. Even though he disagreed with them, there was a cordiality. Is that?
Yeah, you're right. He partly benefited. Yeah, no, I think that's very astute, and he partly benefited from his predecessor, now the Indiana governor, the Blade, who took the bullets for the president on the Hill. Now he, coming after him, Josh Bolten was able to have better relations. He has fostered those. I think what you'll see a continuation, though, of is continuing a behind the scenes, in the background, chief of staff. The Wall Street Journal a couple years ago had an inspired cartoon with a profile of Secretary Card, in which they showed the president walking on stage and Secretary Card walking behind them with a flashlight, shining it on the president. And that captures exactly how he did the job.
And that's what a chief of staff should do. But what you're saying is that Josh Bolten is going to be a little bit different from that. A little bit different profile.
Well, he is, after all, an investment banker. He has serious credentials in economics, and I think that is going to be valued on the Hill. It's especially going to be valued by Republicans who see the economy as a positive issue in the November elections, and who think the Republicans have room to sell their program to the citizens. And they have this man who understands economics and understands politics now representing the president.
What are the next changes? I mean, now we have a chief of staff change. The hardest job in Washington. Scott McClellan, does he stay? Are there other changes in the White House? Who's the new OMB candidate? What are you hearing about that today?
Well, as a signal of the continuity that they want, I think the leading candidate to replace Josh Bolten is his deputy, Joel Kaplan, who a lot of people think has the best resume in Washington. Harvard Law, Harvard undergrad, Marine officer, intense action in Gulf War, worked under Josh both in the policy shop in Austin and the West Wing, now in the budget. So I think
the other deputy is Clay Johnson, who was the president's chief of staff down in Austin.
Right.
He certainly should be a contender as well.
Sure.
Should he not?
Sure. And someone who has a personal relationship with the president that predates any of those. As far as broader changes, Ken, I think there's a number of people who are waiting for a period of good news to leave, and they've been waiting for a while, and you can see the consequences of that.
Been there, done that, right? Roger, Simon, Mike Allen, thanks for joining us. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Ken.
We'll be right back. Joining me now from Washington is Ken Walsh. Ken's the chief White House correspondent and senior writer for U.S. News and World Report. Welcome, Ken.
Nice to be here.
You've been covering White Houses since I was there.
That's right.
You've known Andy Card probably since 1987, 1988.
Right.
I understand you had a conversation with him the end of last week.
Exactly.
What was it like? Did you have any sense that something was different?
Well, it was an interesting dynamic because, it hasn't been easy to get an interview with Andy Card for quite a long time now because he hasn't been doing a lot of public media. And so I was doing this piece for U.S. News about Bush as a CEO president, using sort of corporate principles to run the government. And I put in a request to talk to Andy Card, and lo and behold, Friday at 1 o'clock, my phone rings, and it's Andy Card. Himself.
Right.
You know, he's a hands-on guy.
Right.
Dolls his own phone.
Right.
And but the interesting thing was I expected maybe to talk to him for 10 minutes. I ended up talking to him about a half hour. And he wanted to talk about certain things. He wanted to address the issue of the systems he had put in place at the White House to correct the problems they'd had.
Had put in place,
right. After Katrina, having a system in place to make sure that the assistance goes to victims, to make sure that the debris is being cleaned up. He made sure to explain this, that he had sort of put this in there so he and the president could prevent problems like the ones that happened before. He talked about this whole seaports issue, just volunteered that he'd put in a system there.
The ports of Dubai.
The Dubai issue, a Dubai-owned company taking over 6 seaports that caused such a huge furor, and the president had to back off of. And so Andy said that he had put in a system so that the president and the chief of staff knew from now on what kind of foreign-owned deals are in the works to prevent the kind of fuss to happen again. And it looked to me that something was different here, that he was almost trying to justify some things that had happened, to say he recognized problems that had occurred and he'd taken steps to fix them. Looking back on it, you know, we see what was happening. This is sort of, he's making the point that he was a good enough manager that he could correct the problems, and it was sort of his bequest to his successor and to President Bush that he put these systems in place. And there's one other quick point, and that's, you mentioned, Ken, about the sort of the poignancy of the discussion today at the White House. And there was a poignant moment in this discussion I had with Andy where I talked to him about staff changes. He didn't announce the staff changes. This is a very White House that keeps things to themselves. But he said his daughter had, in discussing whether he was tired and whether this rumor was true about exhaustion in the White House, his daughter had said to him, well, you know, you don't look much different now than you have in the past. And Andy said, maybe I've been working these hours so long, I don't even know how tired I am anymore.
Wow.
And it was a very interesting moment. So, you know, you put all that together, you could see something seemed to be coming. And I think he saw that.
Talk for a minute or two about Andy's style, not in these last few months, but in these 5 years. He's the person who delivered the news, whispered it to President Bush on 9/11. My view has always been that he's been a very collegial chief of staff.
Right.
Not the hammer,
yes,
but rather the coaxer, the person who got people together, the collegiality. Right. That's why he is so beloved. Talk for a minute or two about his management style for President Bush.
Right. Well, Andy, I've covered this 13 chiefs of staff now in the years I've been covering the presidency, and Andy was one of the most collegial. Andy sort of didn't seem to have a bad word to say about anybody, even the president's political opponents most of the time. You know, it's hard to picture him being sort of the hammer that so many presidents need. I think that was your word earlier, that presidents need to make things happen. I think Josh Bolton will be more of a sort of a tough guy presence in the White House. And I think that's probably one thing that the president perhaps felt he needed more of, is somebody who would sort of, you know, kick butt, as they say. But I think
not a hammer or a screwdriver.
A screwdriver, right? Okay. But I think that's part of why Andy was so popular there. I'm reminded by the different models of being chief of staff. Andy was not the kind of chief of staff who was a public spokesman for the president very often. Didn't do television, for instance, a lot. He was not a real policy maker. He did not take positions on things as other chiefs of staff has done. He was a manager and was very self-effacing. That's the thing that a lot of people are surprised about Andy Card concerning. He really didn't want to take credit. He wanted to give all the credit to the president. He would take blame.
Which is what a White House chief of staff should do.
Right, exactly. Now I think there's another aspect of it. Was he too much sort of a sidekick for the president? Did he, you know, because he traveled with him. He went down to the president's ranch in Crawford a lot. Other chiefs of staff didn't travel. As I recall, you didn't travel nearly as much as some other chiefs of staff did, because you were trying to keep the White House running. So I think that there's this element that you hear around Washington among some Republicans, that perhaps the people around the president in the inner circle are too much sort of what one political science describes as mind guards, people who are with the president, sort of his companions, rather than doing other things. That may be unfair, but that's the kind of criticism that was bubbling up that Josh Bolton will have to address.
Andy Card, future?
Right. Well, Andy,
is he going to write a book? Is he going to give speeches?
Well, I find it hard to think he would write a book. He doesn't talk out of school. I think, he's from Massachusetts.
As you know, I believe in that also.
Yeah, I know you do. Exactly. I do write books.
We leave it right, exactly.
But no, I don't feel he'll write a book. I think that he'll sort of take some time to himself. And I think he has a very lucrative and happy life ahead of him in the corporate world.
He's a good man.
He is a good man, and people like him so much. Another interesting thing about this dynamic is I don't think you're going to see Andy Card sort of savaged in the media by critics or anybody. People respect him too much. He has never done that himself.
They respect him and they like him.
They do.
Right.
And so it's one of those cases where what goes around comes around. In this case, that sort of self-effacing, sort of benign presence of Andy Card, I think, will do him a lot of good now that he's leaving the job, and he'll leave a lot of, I think, fond memories behind. And you don't often see that when people leave this very much of a hothouse atmosphere.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ken Walsh, thanks a million for joining us.
Thank you so much.
You're terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be right back.
I am Dennis Ross, sitting in tonight for Charlie Rose. Israeli voters went to the polls today to elect a new parliament. These are the first elections since the Israeli pullout from Gaza and Ariel Sharon's incapacitation earlier this year. The Kadima party, led by acting Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, is ahead in the polls. While Olmert's party is in the driver's seat to put together the next government, he will now need to work with other parties to form a coalition. The election has been called a referendum on Olmert's initiative to shape Israel's borders by 2010. Joining me in Washington are David Makovsky. He is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and Ziad Asali. He is president and founder of the American Task Force on Palestine. Welcome to both of you. David, I just said that in effect this election was a referendum on what Israel's future borders would be, what would happen with the West Bank. How do you explain such a consequential election should be marked by what is a relatively low voter turnout?
I think, Dennis, you had a few factors. First, you had Ehud Olmert himself, who gave a speech saying that with his lead in the polls, this election has already been decided. So people said, well, then why vote? Second, this is the fourth time Israelis have been going to the polls in 7 years. I think there's a little voter fatigue. Third, you didn't have charismatic figures like you've had in the past, whether it's an Ariel Sharon, a Yitzhak Rabin. And I think all those things together, and I would say maybe the last point, people didn't think war and peace hung in the balance. But yet it is indeed a very consequential election.
I mean, it is interesting that they may not have had that perception. Somehow there was a kind of comfort level with where things were headed, and they voted. And in a way, it certainly looks like there are a set of implications from this. What do you see those implications being?
Well, I think basically it all derives from Olmert himself, who basically took a position. He could have had it easy, what I would call the Mona Lisa candidate, smiling at everybody. But basically, he broke from Israeli tradition, which is to be ambiguous, not to alienate potential constituencies, and said, look, if you're voting for me, these are the things that I'm going to do in office. And a lot of the critiques of people who've made territorial concessions is there's no mandate, you've never had a referendum, you've not been elected on these ideas. Olmert decided he was going to go forward based on these policies. He took a hit in terms of the total votes, but I think the 31 seats he does have are now more consequential because people know exactly what they're getting.
All right, so let's take a look at this a little bit more closely. Yes, he has roughly 31, 32, could be a little higher, could be a little lower. These, we have to emphasize, these are still polls. We don't have the actual results yet. But there is an interesting set of implications, are there not, in terms of the kind of coalition that could be put together?
Yeah. Well, basically, what's interesting here is that the right-wing parties who came out against Olmert's ideas in a very unambiguous fashion, the most you could, and after you slice and dice, the most they could get is around 50, 51 or so seats out of 120. In other words, they don't have a veto power to block Olmert in fashioning a center-left coalition. I think he has a range of options, but the key is that the right, if they would have polled another 10 seats or so, they could have forced him into a center-right approach and basically tied his hands from pulling out from most of the West Bank, but they didn't garner that sort of support.
Well, let's take a little closer look at this. I mean, there's a reality here, as you just said, that there isn't a center-right coalition that could block him. Mm-hmm. He is in the driver's seat, as we said before, but when he's in the driver's seat, he still has other people he has to contend with. Now, what does this coalition look like, A. B, how much of a mandate does he really have to pursue the kind of plan he was talking about publicly? And C, what does it mean in terms of pursuing separation, and how quickly might it be pursued?
Well, Olmert himself has laid out a kind of a sequence, saying that first he would offer the new Palestinian government to basically to change its stripes and to not accept Hamas's ways to destroy Israel and engage in negotiations. Then he said he would engage in a dialogue with different segments of Israeli society. In other words, that disengagement is not his first choice. But I think these other steps could go fairly quickly if it's clear there's no negotiating alternative. I assume he'll try to put together a government with the Labor Party, with Meretz, with some of the religious parties.
Like Shas.
Like Shas, Aguda, which is ultra-Orthodox, but yet have not been against joining him. Basically, the only parties that I don't see him working with are the Settler Party on the right, and the Likud, if it remains under the leadership of Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of the Likud, who fared very poorly and said disengagement was dangerous for Israel. But I think he has a lot of options, and the month of April, I think, will be largely taken up with him fashioning some sort of coalition based on the options he has. I think there's only one point I want to make on a philosophical plane that I think, gets people to understand what he represents and what this election is about. The fact that this party, even though it didn't win 36 seats, 31, the point is it won the most of any Israeli party. This party didn't exist a few months ago.
That's extraordinary.
And it's unprecedented in Israeli elections that a party would come from nowhere and come in first. And I think what it really, on a philosophical level, represents is somewhat a rejection of solutions on left and right. The belief on the right was the status quo was tenable indefinitely. You could have settlements, you could have no violence, you could have it all. You could have prosperity. The view on the left was you could reach a negotiated peace with the Palestinians tomorrow morning. I think the Israeli public believes that it's gone through so much that neither right nor left solutions actually work. It went for Olmert, and as I understand it, because it wanted a borders party. It wasn't a peace party, but it basically said, okay, give up whatever it is, 92% of the West Bank, but create borders for Israel. And that 92 is close to the Clinton 95 that you worked on. So
look, what is interesting when I take a look at this is that fundamentally there's a consensus in Israel, and it's reflected in this election. When you add up, in a sense, all the votes center-left, what you come up with, as you put it, is a borders party. But what in fact it reflects is a sense that we want to be done managing, controlling, occupying the Palestinians.
That's it.
And if it means that we're going to get out of most of the West Bank, we're prepared to do that.
That's right.
And we want a government that is prepared to say not only that they will do that, but they'll actually act on it. Now, that was part of the appeal of Sharon. He set this in motion by getting out of Gaza. And it does create what I consider to be a kind of interesting irony. We now have an Israeli body politic that is saying, we want to be done with the Palestinians, we don't want to control the Palestinians, we don't want to occupy the Palestinians, we're prepared to get out of their lives. And on the other side, we have a new Palestinian government about to be formed, which wants to be seeing the end of Israel, not just that they don't want separation from Israel, they don't want Israel to exist. Now, Ziad, we're in this situation, we have a new Palestinian government. How will a Hamas-led government look at what has just emerged in Israel? From their standpoint, is it in their interests? Is it not in their interests? How will they approach it?
Well, Hamas victory was an inward-looking statement by the Palestinian people about what's happening inside their own country. They were opposed to the Palestinian Authority and to Fatah more than they were for anything else. So it does not really involve questions of the general settlement that is expected between Israel and Palestine. The Palestinian people figured out that Abu Mazen, with his accommodation policy, did not get a whole lot for them. So they said, we might as well clean out our own house. Now, Hamas is in a position to reassess itself, its own policies, its own stated policies, whether it wants to agree with the international consensus, the Arab League, the binding agreements of the Palestinians themselves with the international community and with Israel, or whether it wants to pursue an independent course. Now, it is up to both parties now to figure out if Hamas can indeed offer any kind of an accommodation that will be acceptable to Israel before Israel goes on in its unilateral approach.
Well, let's take, in a sense, what David was saying before. David was saying that Olmert has talked about a sequence. Yes. That in the first instance, he's going to give negotiations a chance. He'll talk internally, but he'll give negotiations a chance. Now, Hamas isn't interested in a negotiation with Israel. Abu Mazen is interested in a negotiation with Israel. But for the Israelis to give negotiations a chance, they're going to have to perceive in Abu Mazen that he has something to offer other than only words. Can he deliver something? If he goes into a negotiation, especially with a Hamas prime minister, a Hamas interior minister, if he goes into negotiations, how does he do it? Can he actually deliver what it is he says?
This has been a challenge for Abu Mazen in the past, the fact that he really took very advanced positions, very courageous positions that cost him internally as well as with constituencies that he lost afterwards. But he was not able to deliver as much as he wanted or as he could have, perhaps some people say, because he did not have the tools. He has always asked for more in terms of Israeli concessions on checkpoints, on releasing prisoners, etc. And he asked for more financial aid to give to the people something to show that moderation, in fact, does pay off. And he asked for more in terms of military support. He did not feel that he received any of the above. At one point in time, Israel, as well as the United States, have to decide whether there is enough in and around the office of the president and the presidency, which is still empowered to negotiate internationally on behalf of the Palestinians as head of the PLO, not just the Palestinian Authority, to build up this basic core of governance able to deliver something for peace. If we are going to continue isolating Hamas as it is and isolate also Abu Mazen, it's going to be very hard to arrive at any kind of a solution.
All right, David, what Ziad is suggesting in effect is that you don't impoverish the Palestinian people. You put Abu Mazen to the test. In some ways, he suggests you put Hamas to the test as well. We now are going to have a new Israeli government. It will take a little while to form it, but it's going to be based on a center-left coalition. How do you think that new government is going to approach the Palestinians in general? How will they deal with Hamas? How will they deal with Abu Mazen, or not deal?
I think in the Middle East, you have too much history, too little geography. These people live cheek by jowl, almost on top of each other.
Which part do you want to say?
And therefore, the key is, I think, a center-left coalition led by Ehud Olmert is going to find a way to deal with Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority. But as you point out, Dennis, I mean, they will boycott Hamas, the government. And it's not just Israel. It's the quartet. That's the United States, the European Union, Russia, the UN have put forth 3 conditions. You know, disavow the calls for Israel's destruction and disavow violence and recognize past agreements. So I think it's not here just Israel. We're talking about the whole world. And I think those are the right conditions. And I think the approach should be help the Palestinian people without helping the Hamas government. And it's not easy, but for Ehud Olmert to walk that line between kind of containment, if you will, on one side of Hamas, and on the other side, not to get into an all-out war confrontation, because he needs a policy towards Hamas which is consistent with his view of getting out of most of the West Bank. Right. If the Palestinian Authority collapses, then Israel's going to get sucked in everywhere in the West Bank and Gaza. I'm not saying it's going to be an easy line to walk, but I think this idea of trying to find ways on a humanitarian level and other ways to help the people without dealing with Hamas unless it meets the quartet, the international community's conditionality, to me that makes sense.
You know, there is an interesting circumstance, I think, where both sides have an interest in calm for their own reasons, where Hamas has an interest in calm to be able to try to deliver on its promises. But to have calm, Hamas also has to prevent others from carrying out attacks against the Israelis. Today there was a Katyusha fired out of Gaza. That crosses a new threshold because it has a very different kind of range. Israel won't sit back. A new government won't sit back. They will act to preempt. So it's not enough for Hamas to say they want an extension of the calm. Hamas is going to have to act in a way in which they demonstrate they're going to do something to preserve the calm, not just talk about it, act against it. Now, if they do you see some potential for a de facto arrangement? Maybe not explicit discussions between the Israeli government and Hamas, but some kind of indirect dialogue and some kind of de facto set of understandings between the two?
If they stop the Islamic Jihad and they stop the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade and other factions that are engaged in terror, they're going to ultimately have to explain that to their people. And that will mean a modification of policy. I just have my doubts that they're going to do that. But if they do that, I'm sure that will be recognized by the Israeli side. They will see something here has changed. But I think the odds are they won't. And therefore, it could be where these two parts kind of all fit together is that because of this Katusha in Gaza, you could see a situation where Israel will get the settlers out of most of the West Bank, 90+% of the West Bank, but leave the Israeli army there so long as there's a threat that Hamas might rocket Israeli urban cities, urban areas, the way we've seen the continual Qassam rockets coming out of Gaza. So I think that the army's deployment there clearly is going to be much lighter if it doesn't have to protect 60,000 settlers on every single road. So it's going to be a different phenomenon.
I want to focus in the last couple minutes that we have remaining on the issue of unilateralism. In a sense, unilateralism is somewhat of a misnomer here. What it refers to is that the Israeli government isn't planning to negotiate a withdrawal with the Palestinians unless, of course, there's a Palestinian partner that they see. But they do plan to negotiate something with the United States and the international community. They want something in return. They may not believe they can get anything from the Palestinians, but they want something from the United States. Now, I want to ask you, David, what is it they want from the United States? And I want to ask you, Ziad, what is it how would the Palestinians react to what it is that the Israelis would be seeking?
Yeah. First, I think you're right, Dennis. I mean, the fact that the Israelis will be pursuing this unilateralism is not because it's desirable, it's because it's what's feasible, because they believe Hamas is not open to a bilateral solution, and Hamas's victory in that sense kind of bolstered Kadima because people said there's no partner. What they want for the United States should be under the kind of headline, it takes more than one to be unilateral. They're going to clearly want a set of understandings for the United States that the settlers that live between what's called the Green Line, this pre-67 boundary, and the barrier, that's about 8% of the West Bank, where 193,000 settlers live, that if Israel gets all the settlers out of the wrong side of the barrier, the 90+%, that they will be able to preserve the block settlers inside the fence, and then Olmert could say to his public, I got you Sharon's vision.
We just have about a minute left, so I'd like to hear from Ziad.
I think one of the problems is that Israel has not found a partner that it really could deal with, from Arafat to Abu Mazen now to Hamas. That is perceived as the Israeli not wanting to see a partner amongst the Palestinians. The other is taking a unilateral position, especially on borders and especially also on Jerusalem, cannot possibly lead to peace, because the borders that are suggested and taking Jerusalem out is not a formula for accommodation. It could be a forced formula that will last for some time. And here's the question that the Israelis have to ask. Do they want to end this conflict, or do they want to hunker down and build themselves a fence they live around, or a wall? So I think the Palestinians, as a people, want to have a solution that is based on a two-state solution. This is not something that's negotiable, even by the election of Hamas. To consider any of their representatives as non-partner and not promise to have them have the ability to produce real partners is a very detrimental to both people.
You know, I think at this stage there's a couple of things that could be done. One thing that could be done, in fact, is that if there's a de facto set of understandings, that creates a whole different climate for thinking about negotiations, number one. Number two, whatever it is the United States might negotiate with the Israelis, at the same time they do that, they should be talking to at least Abu Mazen to say, look, we're going to be going down this road unless you can deliver something. If you can deliver something to show you can live up to your obligations and responsibilities, we can produce a negotiation. If not, there'll be political borders. They may not be an international border, but there'll be political borders. We're out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank both of you for what is an interesting discussion and highlight some of the key issues we're going to face. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
Anna Marie Cox is here until January of this year. She was the voice behind the popular political blog known as Wanket. The blog took a humorous and irreverent look at the Washington political scene and its players. Her new book is called Dog Days, a novel. I am pleased to have her back at this table to talk about everything. Now, why did you give this up? We've talked about this before, but just remind everybody why you're no longer Wanket.
10 posts a day.
10 posts a day is tough.
I was basically chained to the computer.
You updated every 15, 20?
It felt like it.
Well, every hour. You updated
it felt
every
like
hour.
It was about every hour.
Yeah.
It's a pretty grueling schedule, and the main perk is that you don't have to wear pants.
So
the trade-off is...
What did you wear?
Pajamas.
Did you really? Could you sit there and work in pajamas?
I did. I usually felt like a slug.
Have to, if I was doing that, I would have to get up and just take a shower and wear something in order to be sort of...
This is why you've had a successful career in media. I did have a rule of thumb, which is I had to be showered and dressed by cocktail hour.
Because you were going out?
Yeah, or just to drink. I mean, it's unseemly to drink before you've taken a shower. But blogging, not so much.
Yeah, that's true. It is unseemly. Now, you've said somewhere else it took you 10 years to find out what you were made to do.
Yeah, it did. Blogging, it turns out. But of course, I give myself a little bit of a pass because blogging didn't exist when I first started looking for something to do.
Right.
So,
but why is it perfect for you?
Well, it was perfect for me for a while. I mean, I think I have transitioned out of it. But I was pretty unemployable, you know. I had poor people skills and...
You had no people skills?
Poor people skills.
Well, but see, I don't understand that. I really don't. I mean, you have this wonderful presence.
It's a presence that, let's say, I think that in the... I think people probably don't...
around you more.
Right. On a daily basis, maybe that look gets a little tiring. I think that... I tend, well, what made me good at blogging is that I'm very sure of my own opinion.
Right.
I'm very quick to say what it is. And I don't like to listen to other people. That's very good in blogging, not so much in an office. People, that kind of attitude tends to not really...
Grow old.
Yes, a little bit.
At some point, you've heard it all and you say, enough.
Right, and also...
We know what you think,
right,
Anna Marie.
Right, and the thing is, like bloggers, to be a good blogger, you have to kind of be blessed with, you know, a kind of... well, blessed or cursed with a conviction that your opinion matters. Actually, I don't think I have that quite. I think that I'm a little less sure that my opinion matters, although I think it matters just as much as anyone else's, let's say.
Your top 5 bloggers are?
Oh God! See, when I had to do it for a living, I didn't realize how little I enjoyed reading blogs. I now realize how little I enjoy reading blogs.
You now realize how little
I enjoy reading blogs. When I was doing it for a living, I just did it, you know. And I can tell you, like, the blogs that are helpful and useful, you know. I think that Daily Coast on the left, redstate.com on the right, and The Corner on the right, if you wanted to keep up with politics and you read those, that would do it. Because between, you know, sort of their overlapping Venn diagram, they're going to look at everything that's important in politics today.
Are you still fascinated by Washington and the way politics works?
Oh, completely.
Nothing has changed about your passion to know how Washington works and what's going on and who's making what deal and who's up and who's down and why are the wheels running off and all that?
That is the true crack for me. Yeah.
That's your crack.
That is crack for me.
You're addicted to...
I'm addicted to knowing, to being in the swirl, to like seeing what's happening. Also, my friends and I sometimes call it the dirty. But it doesn't mean necessarily who's having an affair, but it can include that. Yeah. But it's like what's going on underneath. And Washington
What is the story not told?
Right. And in Washington also, it's such a fascinating place. You know, it's the only city in America completely run by nerds and populated mostly by nerds, who are my people. And also, it's because it's such a one-company town, more so, I think, than either New York or L.A. Mm-hmm. And because it attracts this very kind of peculiar subculture. It's like having your own personal ant farm for like social experiments, you know. Yeah. I mean, like you can see the stratification of different, you know, class members. You can kind of see who becomes the king and queen ant, you know.
Who are the king and queen ants now?
Oh, see now I can't say that. It's always changing. I mean, it's always changing. I think that's one of the things that makes it interesting, and it's never and it's going to be a little bit different for different groups of people, you know. Like I think. You know, the other excellent comparison for Washington is high school. I use that a lot.
Yeah.
And there is definitely a popular kids table, you know.
Cokie Roberts used to say that the best experience you could have for covering Congress was raising a 2-year-old.
I think that the best experience for sort of figuring out Washington is having gotten a few swirlies in high school. I mean, because I think that if you understand the kind of person that's too busy passing, you know, legislation against depantsing to go to prom, like those are the people now running Washington. You know, and they get what's really great about them is they finally are in a place where being smart is what makes you popular. Like being savvy is what counts. You know, and so that sort of feeds this really, I mean, the kind of people who may not have gotten a second look in high school suddenly are the big man on campus.
Because smart counts.
Smart counts. Smart and what you know.
Yeah. Information and intelligence.
Information and intelligence.
Makes a difference.
Yeah.
Is somebody like DeLay?
Because no one's very good looking, too. You have to remember that. Because if we could, we can't judge them on their looks.
Yeah. I mean, here you were, you were a leading blogger, and you said, I'm going to withdraw from that. I'm going to go write this book.
Right.
Why?
Well, it's true. I also didn't have to leave the house to write the book, which was good. Well, as we were saying, I mean, I'm really fascinated by Washington, and the more I saw of Washington, and the book takes place in August between the conventions during an election year,
right.
And I was in D.C.
Between the two conventions.
Right.
Yeah.
I was in D.C. in August between the conventions during an election year, and the things I saw and kind of the stories I heard, they were all too kind of perfect and funny and real to not fictionalize. You know,
like
they needed to be in the book.
Okay, I haven't read the book. Tell me the story of Dog Days.
At least you're open about it.
Yeah, of course.
It's a story of a young campaign aide named Melanie Thornton, whose life is going grand. Her candidate is doing well, and she's having an affair with the most powerful political journalist in Washington.
Yeah.
And then things start to go wrong. She comes back from the convention to find that a mysterious 527 group is accusing her candidate of nefarious doings. They claim that he was brainwashed while at Harvard so that at some point in the future, on a given command, he will redistribute wealth. They're called Citizens for Clear Heads. And then also it turns out that people are starting to find out about her affair, which is not so great either. And so she and her best friend come up with a wag the dog scheme with a lot of tail.
All right. If you want to know more, read the book.
Yeah.
So, in terms of politics, I mean, would you like to be involved in a political campaign?
Oh, God, no.
Never?
Never.
You want to watch them and observe them and photograph them and look at them and talk to them and hear their secrets late at night?
I've seen too much about what it's like to be on a campaign. And it's not, there's parts of it that are incredibly exhilarating and rewarding. It's really draining. It's really intense. And, you know, there's a lot of sex and a lot of drinking and a lot of banter. But these people don't get into campaigns for that. They get into campaigns because they actually believe in their candidate. And the risk you run...
I'm glad you said that, because there's a lot more of that true than we know. People think that everybody who gets into campaigns are only getting because they want some job in some administration in the future. They may very well want that. But there are a lot of people, and especially the young people who come to campaigns and do all the grunt work, do it because they care about, they have a certain civic sense.
Right. No one walks into the door of a campaign because of the open bar at some big donors party.
Right. Exactly.
You know, like that's not what gets you into the door. It may what keeps you there for a little while. Yeah. And I think that kind of investment, I mean, I was active in politics once, you know, as a young idealistic person, and making that kind of investment with your life and to have it, you know, there's a big chance it won't work out.
Have you grown from a young idealistic person to a less young cynical person?
I think I think in order to be cynical, you have to have some idealism. Because you have to have the capacity to be disappointed. You have to have the capacity to believe that something better is possible in order to not like what actually exists. You know.
So out of all this observation, comment, conversation, late night, and
early
morning, who is it you admire the most? Who do you sort of still have a certain reverence for?
There's sort of two answers. There's like a sort of very easy answer of a public figure, which is I like every reporter in Washington. I have drunk the John McCain Kool-Aid. You know, like
really?
I think he's great. But
it is an amazing story of how the media loves him.
It is. No, I think actually.
Well, the country too, maybe, but I mean, he's the most popular politician in America.
Right. Although it's likely he won't get the Republican nomination. I actually was telling someone.
That's still open for debate.
I was telling someone today the way he could get it, the way he could win over Republican primary voters, is if the media suddenly turned on him.
Well, you know what? I mean, I think the truth is different from that. I mean, I think what he did in 2004 for George Bush, you know, got him halfway there.
Sure, it did.
You know,
I have a second answer to the question about people I admire, which is something I hadn't really thought about until you asked, which is that I really admire like the hardworking reporters who do kind of the bulk of the work in Washington, like the wire reporters.
Yeah, I do too.
Those are the people. Without them, the media engine would truly stop.
I love having somebody on this show who knows a story up one side, down the other. You know, a beat reporter.
Yeah.
Who can just tell you almost everything you want to know. Because that person just
more.
and more. Because they live with the story,
right.
And they understand it, and all they do all day, while you're doing 1,000 other things, is just with blinders.
And unfortunately, they rarely get asked on like the Sunday talk shows. You know, the people who get asked on the Sunday talk shows are the people who kind of hover in this sphere where they don't actually get their hands into that.
And rarely say anything you don't expect them to say.
Yeah, they're
rarely. Pretty
content-free, you know. But sometimes there's an amusing opinion.
Anna Marie Cox's book is called Dog Days. It is a novel. She, at some day, will not necessarily be Wonkette, but she may very well be back blogging, reading blogs, and or maybe running a political campaign. Who knows? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
For every drop of yourself you give, get every drop back. We offer over 80 ways to hydrate, energize, nourish, relax, or enjoy every drop of life.
Charlie Rose on PBS is brought to you in part by J.P. Morgan Chase, providing financial services and solutions to more than 30 million consumers, institutions, corporations, and governments worldwide.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide.